The first thing Daniel Brooks noticed was not the snow on her hair. It was the way the pregnant woman apologized before anyone had even helped her. Emily Parker stepped onto the number 47 bus at 8:16 that night, with one hand tucked beneath her swollen belly and the other holding a small pile of coins that trembled in her palm. Outside, Pittsburgh had turned white and silent, the kind of February snow that swallowed headlights, softened street signs, and made every sidewalk look farther away than it really was. Her coat was too thin for the weather, a faded beige thing with one missing button, and wet sleeves darkened from the storm. Snow clung to the ends of her hair. Her shoes made a soft squeak against the rubber floor mat as she moved toward the fare box, breathing carefully, like every breath had to be negotiated. Daniel had driven buses for 29 years. He had seen tired people, angry people, people who climbed aboard carrying grocery bags, work boots, hospital bracelets, court papers, children asleep against their shoulders. But something about this woman made his hand tighten around the steering wheel. Maybe it was the way she kept her eyes down. Maybe it was the way she pressed her lips together when the bus rocked in the wind. Or maybe it was because she looked less like someone asking for a ride and more like someone trying not to fall apart in public. Emily dropped the coins into the machine. Quarters. Dimes. Nickels. 1 penny slipped from her fingers and rolled beneath the front seat. The fare box blinked red. Short. $1.25 short. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the woman in the camel-colored wool coat near the front gave a sharp little laugh. Margaret Collins had boarded 3 stops earlier, smelling of expensive perfume and warm leather gloves, already annoyed that the bus was late. She looked Emily up and down the way people look at a problem they believe belongs to someone else. "You're kidding," she said. Emily's cheeks turned pink from something worse than cold. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I had enough." A man farther back sighed loudly. Someone muttered about people holding up the route. A teenager lifted his phone, not fully recording yet, just waiting for the moment to become worth sharing. Daniel glanced toward the windshield. Snow hammered against the glass. The hospital was still miles away. Then the radio crackled, and Supervisor Alan Pierce's voice came through, flat and impatient. "Driver, if she can't pay, she gets off." Emily swallowed, one hand tightening over her belly. "It's okay," she said softly. "I can walk." And that was when Daniel Brooks stopped breathing for half a second, because he had heard those words before, 12 years ago, from someone he never got the chance to save. That morning had begun with the sound of her phone vibrating against the kitchen counter, a thin, nervous buzz beside an empty cereal box and a stack of unopened bills. Emily Parker had been awake since 5:12, not because she wanted to be, but because the cold in her apartment had found its way beneath the blankets and settled into her bones. The radiator under the window had stopped working 3 days earlier. The landlord said someone would come look at it when the roads cleared, which meant no one was coming soon. Emily stood in the small kitchen, wearing 2 sweaters, thick socks, and the same beige coat she would later wear into the storm. The apartment smelled faintly of instant oatmeal, old heat, and the lemon cleaner she used every night because she believed a place could be poor without being dirty. When the phone rang, the hospital number appeared on the cracked screen. She answered before the second buzz. The nurse on the other end spoke gently, too gently, the way people speak when they are trying not to frighten you. Her last appointment had shown something they wanted to check again. The baby's movement pattern had changed. The doctor wanted her in that day, preferably before evening. Emily looked toward the window, where snow was already pressing against the glass in soft white sheets. "Is it serious?" she asked. There was a pause just long enough to make her grip the counter. "We just do not want to wait," the nurse said. After the call ended, Emily stood still for almost a full minute, one hand on her belly, the other wrapped around the phone. The baby shifted once, small and slow, and Emily whispered, "Okay, sweetheart. We are going." She opened her wallet on the table. $3.40. That was everything until Friday. No credit card with room left. No savings. No family close enough to call. The baby's father had disappeared before the second trimester, leaving behind a voicemail full of promises and nothing else. Emily had stopped listening to it months ago. She checked the price for a rideshare anyway, knowing before the screen loaded that she could not afford it. $42 because of the storm. She laughed once, quietly, not because anything was funny, but because her body needed somewhere to put the fear. By late afternoon, the snow had worsened. She wrapped her medical papers in a plastic grocery bag, tied it twice, and tucked it under her arm. At the door, she paused and looked back at the apartment. The folded baby blanket on the chair, the second-hand crib still missing 2 screws, the tiny yellow onesie hanging from a cabinet handle because the closet was too damp. Then she stepped outside. The wind hit her first. It slipped through the gap in her coat, wet and sharp, stealing warmth before she had even reached the stairs. The bus stop was 7 blocks away. 7 blocks did not sound far unless you were 8.5 months pregnant, walking through snow deep enough to hide the curb, with shoes that had already begun to soak through. Every few steps, Emily stopped, pressed a hand under her belly, and breathed through the ache. Cars passed slowly, tires hissing through slush. No one stopped. By the time she reached the shelter, her toes were numb, her fingers were stiff around the bag of papers, and the coins in her pocket felt like small pieces of ice. Still, when the bus lights appeared through the storm, Emily felt something close to hope. Just one ride, she told herself. Just make it to the hospital. She did not know yet that the hardest part of the trip would not be the snow. Daniel Brooks had started his shift that afternoon before the snow became serious, back when it was still just a warning on the radio and a gray weight in the sky. He had reported to the Allegheny Transit Garage at 2:30, signed his name on the clipboard, checked the tires, tested the heater, wiped the fog from the inside of the windshield, and placed a small thermos of black coffee beside his seat. The other drivers joked about the weather, complained about overtime, and shook snow salt from their boots onto the concrete floor. Daniel smiled when he was supposed to smile, nodded when someone spoke to him, and kept mostly quiet. That was how people knew him. Steady, polite, never late, never dramatic. A man who wore his uniform pressed, kept quarters in the cup holder for riders who came up short, and remembered which elderly passengers needed a few extra seconds before he closed the doors. He was 58 years old, with tired blue eyes, broad hands, and a face shaped by years of looking through windshields into weather most people were trying to escape. He had driven buses in Pittsburgh for nearly 3 decades, through summer heat rising off asphalt, through autumn rain that turned the streets silver, through winter mornings so cold the doors groaned before opening. But snow was different. Snow reached somewhere in him nothing else could touch. 12 years earlier, on a night much like this one, Daniel had been home fixing a leaky kitchen faucet when his daughter, Sarah, called from the side of a county road outside Butler. She was 22, stubborn, kind, and newly married. The kind of young woman who still called her father when her car made a strange sound because she trusted him more than any mechanic. Her voice had been calm at first, then colder, then smaller. She said she could see headlights passing, but nobody was stopping. Daniel grabbed his coat and keys so fast he left the front door unlocked. But the storm was worse north of the city. Traffic crawled. Road crews blocked one route, then another. By the time help reached Sarah, the waiting had done what the weather started. Daniel never spoke about that night at work. He did not keep photographs on his dashboard. He did not tell passengers why he always waited when someone ran toward the bus in bad weather, waving one glove in the air. He simply waited. He waited for nurses leaving late shifts, for warehouse workers with soaked backpacks, for old men crossing icy sidewalks one careful step at a time. If he saw someone in the cold, he opened the door. That was his rule, not the company's rule. His. So when Emily Parker climbed onto his bus that night with snow in her hair and fear hidden behind an apology, Daniel did not see a fare problem. He saw a woman standing at the edge of being left behind, and the old pain in his chest, the one he had learned to carry without touching, opened its eyes. The bus did not move. Its engine hummed beneath the floor, low and tired, while the red light on the fare box kept blinking like a small accusation. Emily stood beside it with her damp medical papers tucked under one arm, and the coin still lying in the metal tray, not enough to buy the ride that might get her to the hospital. The heater was on, but she was still shivering. Melted snow ran from the ends of her hair down the side of her neck. Her beige coat clung to her shoulders. She tried to step backward, but the aisle was crowded, and every face seemed turned toward her. Margaret Collins shifted in her seat near the front, crossing one polished boot over the other. Her camel-colored coat looked warm enough for a different world. "This is ridiculous," she said, louder now, making sure everyone could hear. "We all paid. We all have places to be." Emily looked at the floor. "I'm sorry," she said again. The words were barely there. "I can get off." A man in a Steelers beanie rubbed his hands together and muttered, "It is freezing. Just let us go." Someone else said, "Rules are rules." The teenager near the middle raised his phone a little higher. Daniel saw the screen glowing in the mirror. He saw Emily see it too. That was the moment her face changed. Not from fear to anger, from fear to shame. She pulled the plastic bag of medical papers closer to her chest, as if it could hide her. Margaret leaned into the aisle. "Being pregnant does not mean the city owes you free transportation." The sentence landed hard, not because it was loud, but because nobody challenged it. The silence around cruelty can be colder than snow. Emily pressed one hand beneath her belly and closed her eyes for half a second. Daniel noticed it. The small tightening around her mouth, the way her breath caught before she forced it out slowly. He had watched enough people in pain to know when someone was pretending they were fine. Alan Pierce's voice came through the radio again, thinner under the static. "Daniel, move the route along. Remove the passenger if she cannot pay." Daniel kept his eyes on the mirror. Emily opened them and tried to smile at him, a fragile little thing that asked for forgiveness she did not owe. "Really," she whispered, "I can walk." Outside the windshield, the snow thickened until the streetlights looked blurred and far away. The hospital was still more than 4 miles across town. The next bus would not come for at least 40 minutes, if it came at all. Daniel looked at her shoes, dark with slush. He looked at her hands, stiff and red from cold. Then he looked past her, toward the back of the bus, where an older man in a gray overcoat sat quietly with both hands resting on a cane, watching everything and saying nothing. Daniel did not know his name. Nobody did. But the old man had not looked away once. Margaret tapped her phone against her palm. "Driver, do your job." Emily turned toward the open door, and a gust of snow swept up the steps. She took one careful step down. Daniel's chest tightened. For 12 years, he had lived with the sound of his daughter saying she could wait. He was not going to spend the rest of his life remembering another woman saying she could walk. Daniel pulled the parking brake so firmly that the bus gave a soft sigh and settled beneath them. The door stayed open, spilling heat into the storm. But Emily did not take another step. She stood halfway between warmth and weather, one foot on the bus step, one hand under her belly, her face turned toward the snow like she was trying to convince herself she could survive it. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt. The small click sounded louder than it should have. He stood slowly, not because he was unsure, but because every passenger was watching, and he wanted them to understand he was making a choice, not a mistake. "Ma'am," he said gently. Emily turned back, embarrassed, cold, already defeated. "Please come back inside." Margaret Collins let out a sharp breath. Unbelievable. Daniel ignored her. He reached behind his seat and took off his heavy navy transit jacket, the one with his name stitched over the pocket, the one issued to him 16 winters ago and patched twice at the elbows. It still held the smell of coffee, diesel heat, and the faint peppermint gum he chewed to stay awake on late routes. He stepped down into the aisle and placed it around Emily's shoulders. The jacket swallowed her. For 1 second, she did not move. She looked at him the way people look when kindness arrives, too late for them to recognize it right away. "Sir, I cannot take this," she whispered. "You can," Daniel said, "and you will." Then he reached into his own pocket, pulled out 2 folded dollar bills and a quarter, and fed them into the fare box. The red light changed to green. The sound was small, just a beep, but it cut through the bus like a verdict. Margaret stood halfway from her seat. "I want your badge number." Daniel turned toward her. His shirt sleeves were thin, and the cold from the open door moved across his arms, but his voice did not shake. "My name is Daniel Brooks. Badge number 4731. Write it down correctly." The teenager's phone was fully raised now. A few passengers looked away, suddenly interested in the floor, the windows, their gloves. Margaret's mouth tightened. "You cannot just change the rules because you feel sorry for someone." Daniel looked at Emily, at the way she was trying not to bend forward from the discomfort she kept hiding. Then he looked back at Margaret. "I am not changing the rules," he said. "I am remembering why they were supposed to exist." Alan Pierce's voice cracked through the radio again. "Daniel, confirm the passenger has exited." Daniel stepped back into the driver's seat and closed the bus doors. Snow slapped against the glass, locked outside. He picked up the radio. "Passenger is aboard," he said. "I am proceeding to Mercy General." Static answered first. Then Alan's voice came back hard. "That is not your route." Daniel looked into the mirror. Emily had lowered herself into the front priority seat, both hands wrapped around the edges of his jacket, tears caught, but not falling. "It is now," Daniel said. He set the radio down before Alan could finish speaking. The bus pulled away from the curb, slow and steady, its tires pushing through slush while the route sign still blinked number 47. Behind him, Margaret began typing furiously on her phone. At the back, the old man in the gray overcoat leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on Daniel with an expression no one could read. Daniel did not notice. His hands were on the wheel, his shirt was already losing warmth, and the hospital was still miles away. But for the first time that night, Emily Parker was not alone in the snow. The bus moved east through streets that had almost disappeared. Daniel kept both hands steady on the wheel, his eyes moving from the windshield to the side mirrors to Emily in the front seat and back again. The snow was no longer falling in flakes. It came sideways now, thick and fast, striking the glass so hard the wipers seemed to be fighting something alive. The heater blew warm air through the vents, but Daniel could still feel the cold through his shirt sleeves where his jacket had been. He did not regret giving it to her. Not for 1 second. Emily sat hunched beneath the heavy navy coat, her face pale under the fluorescent bus lights, her medical papers pressed against her lap. Every few moments she closed her eyes and breathed in carefully through her nose, then out through her mouth. Daniel had seen that kind of breathing before in passengers trying to hide pain from strangers. He lowered his voice without turning around. "Miss Parker, you doing all right?" Emily opened her eyes. "I'm okay," she said, but the words came too quickly. "I just need to get there." Margaret Collins, still seated near the front, gave a bitter little laugh. "We all need to get somewhere." No one answered her. The bus rolled past closed storefronts, dark office windows, and parked cars buried up to their bumpers in snow. A delivery truck sat angled at an intersection with its hazard lights blinking orange through the storm. Daniel slowed, turned wide, and kept going. Then the radio snapped back to life. Alan Pierce sounded less impatient now and more official, which was worse. "Daniel Brooks, you are instructed to return to your assigned route immediately. Do you understand?" Daniel pressed the button. "I have a medical passenger. I am taking her to Mercy General." "You are not authorized to make that call." "Then write that down too," Daniel said, "along with my badge number." Static swallowed Alan's reply. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. The teenager lowered his phone for the first time. Emily looked toward Daniel with wet eyes, but before she could speak, her hand tightened around the edge of the jacket. Her breath stopped. Then it came out broken and small. Daniel saw her bend forward just a little, not enough to alarm people who were not paying attention. Enough for him. "Emily," he said, using her name now. "Talk to me." She tried to answer, but another wave of discomfort passed over her face. "The baby," she whispered. The bus went quiet. Even Margaret stopped typing. Daniel checked the route ahead. Mercy General was still a little over 3 miles away, but the main bridge light showed red in the distance. Traffic backed up and frozen beneath the storm. He reached for the radio again and called dispatch for emergency assistance. The answer came back after a long hiss of static. Multiple accidents across the city, delayed response times, crews moving as fast as possible. Daniel knew what that meant. No one was close enough. He looked at the bridge, then at the side road to the right, a narrow old service route climbing behind the warehouses. It was marked restricted during winter weather. Drivers were warned not to use it unless cleared by supervisors. Daniel had sat through that training every year. He knew the rule. He also knew the hospital entrance was less than 15 minutes away if he took it. Alan Pierce came back on the radio, sharp and clear. "Do not take Liberty Hill Road, Daniel. That is a direct order." Daniel stared through the windshield at the blocked bridge, then at Emily, shaking beneath his jacket, trying to be brave because life had taught her not to expect anyone else to be. He turned on the right signal. Margaret stood up. "You cannot be serious." Daniel did not look at her. "Sit down, ma'am." The old man in the gray overcoat finally lifted his head fully, his eyes narrowing with quiet attention. Daniel guided the bus onto Liberty Hill Road. Slow, careful, one tire track at a time. The city dropped behind them in a blur of snow and yellow light. Emily whispered something under her breath, maybe a prayer, maybe her baby's name. Daniel leaned forward over the wheel, his jaw tight, his hand steady, and said softly, "Stay with me, sweetheart. I have lost one girl in the snow. I am not losing another." Liberty Hill Road climbed behind the old warehouses like a forgotten ribbon of pavement, narrow, steep, and half buried beneath drifting snow. Daniel drove it the way a man carries something fragile through a dark room, slowly enough to respect the danger, fast enough to know there was no time to waste. The bus groaned as it rose past loading docks, chain-link fences, and brick buildings with their windows boarded or black. Inside, no one complained anymore. The only sounds were the wipers, the heater, Emily's careful breathing, and the soft rattle of Margaret Collins's bracelet as her hand shook around her phone. She was still recording, but her face had changed. What she had thought would be proof against Daniel was becoming something else, something she could not control. Emily leaned against the window, Daniel's jacket wrapped around her shoulders, her fingers pressed into the worn fabric near his stitched name. Brooks. She kept looking at that name like it was something solid she could hold on to. "I am sorry," she whispered. Daniel heard her in the mirror. "Do not apologize. Everyone is scared because of me." "No," he said. "Everyone is seeing what kind of night this really is." Near the back of the bus, the older man in the gray overcoat lowered his gaze to the cane across his knees. His name was William Harrington, though no one on that bus knew it. Not Margaret. Not Alan Pierce on the radio. Not even Daniel Brooks, who had driven past Harrington Transit headquarters hundreds of times without ever seeing the man whose signature sat on contracts, pay scales, disciplinary forms, winter policies, and every rule Daniel was breaking that night. William had boarded the number 47 3 stops before Emily, without an assistant, without a driver, without the black town car his executives insisted he use. For 6 months, complaints had been landing on his desk. Drivers rushing past elderly passengers in bad weather. Supervisors pressuring operators to stay on schedule no matter what. Riders treated like delays instead of people. William had not believed all of it. He had built Harrington Transit from 2 used shuttle vans and a borrowed office near the airport. He wanted to believe his company still carried his name with decency. So he had started riding the routes himself, quietly, once or twice a week, dressed like any older passenger trying to get home. And tonight, he had seen more than any report could have shown him. He had watched Margaret shame a woman who was clearly in distress. He had heard Alan Pierce order Daniel to put her back into the storm. He had seen passengers look away because looking away was easier than choosing a side. And then he had watched Daniel Brooks stand up, give away his coat, pay the fare, close the door, and turn a city bus into the only lifeline Emily had. William had said nothing because he needed to know something important. Not whether Daniel would be kind when people praised him, whether he would stay kind when kindness could cost him everything. The radio cracked again. "Daniel, stop the vehicle and await instructions." Daniel did not answer. His eyes stayed on the road. Ahead, the hill dipped toward Mercy General, its emergency entrance glowing faintly through the snow like a promise almost out of reach. Emily suddenly gripped the seat rail and breathed in sharply. William stood halfway from his seat before anyone else moved. "Driver," he said, calm but firm, his voice carrying through the bus. "Keep going." Daniel looked into the mirror for half a second. The old man's eyes met his. They were not frightened. They were certain. And somehow, on that frozen road, with his job hanging by a thread and a mother fighting to stay calm behind him, that certainty gave Daniel 1 more mile. The emergency entrance of Mercy General appeared through the storm at 9:07, glowing red and white behind a curtain of snow. Daniel guided the bus beneath the covered drop-off lane and pressed the brake so gently the vehicle seemed to exhale. For a second, no one moved. Then the doors opened, and the cold rushed in with the sound of hospital alarms somewhere beyond the glass. Daniel stood, his legs stiff from tension, his shirt damp at the collar, his hands aching from gripping the wheel. "We are here," he said, but Emily did not answer right away. She was bent forward under his jacket, breathing through another wave of pain, her face pale and shining beneath the harsh bus lights. A nurse near the entrance saw her through the windshield and ran inside. Within moments, 2 orderlies and a doctor came through the sliding doors with a wheelchair. Daniel stepped down first, then turned back and offered Emily his hand. She took it without looking embarrassed this time. Her fingers were cold. "I'm scared," she whispered. Daniel leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "I know. But you made it. Your baby made it. That is what matters now." The medical team surrounded her with practiced urgency, asking questions, checking her pulse, moving her into the chair. Emily tried to give the jacket back, but Daniel shook his head. "Keep it until you are warm." She looked at the stitched name over the pocket again. Brooks. Her eyes filled. "Thank you, Daniel." Then the doors closed behind her, and she disappeared into the bright white hallway. The bus stayed under the hospital canopy for almost 5 minutes. Nobody complained. Margaret Collins sat frozen in her seat, her phone dark in her lap. The teenager who had recorded everything stared at Daniel like he was seeing him differently now. William Harrington remained at the back, quiet, unreadable, one hand resting on his cane. Daniel finally returned to the driver's seat and picked up the radio. Alan Pierce was already waiting. "Return to the garage immediately," Alan said. "You are suspended pending review." Daniel looked toward the hospital doors. "Understood." His voice was calm because the only question that mattered had already been answered. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Harrington Transit headquarters at 7:45, wearing an old brown coat because his uniform jacket was still with Emily. Snow had been cleared from the sidewalks, but the city looked exhausted. Piled white along the curbs, gray slush at every crossing. Inside, the conference room smelled like burnt coffee, copier paper, and nervous authority. Alan Pierce sat at the head of the table with a disciplinary folder in front of him. 2 managers sat beside him, avoiding Daniel's eyes. "You abandoned your assigned route," Alan began. "You ignored direct orders. You used a restricted winter road without clearance. You endangered company property and disrupted passenger service." Daniel folded his hands on the table. Did the mother and baby survive? Alan paused, annoyed. "That is not the issue. It is the only issue I came here caring about." Before Alan could answer, the conference room door opened. The older man from the bus walked in, no longer hidden beneath anonymity. His gray overcoat was gone. His suit was dark, perfectly tailored, and the managers stood so quickly their chairs scraped the floor. Alan's face changed. Daniel turned slowly. William Harrington placed a small drive on the table, then looked at Alan. "I think," he said, "we should all watch what really happened on my bus last night." William Harrington did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room became quiet the moment the footage appeared on the conference screen. First came Emily standing beside the fare box, soaked from the storm, trying to count coins with trembling fingers. Then Margaret Collins's voice filled the room, sharp and cold, followed by Alan Pierce on the radio, ordering Daniel to remove her from the bus. Daniel watched without blinking. He had lived the moment once already. Watching it again did not make it smaller. The video showed Emily turning toward the open door. It showed the snow sweeping up the steps. It showed Daniel standing, taking off his jacket, paying her fare, and driving toward Mercy General, while everyone else sat in the warmth his choice had protected. Alan's face lost color with every second. When the footage ended, William picked up the remote and turned off the screen. "This company does not exist to move vehicles," he said. "It exists to move people. Somewhere along the way, some of you forgot the difference." No one spoke. William turned to Alan. "You are relieved of your position effective immediately. Human resources will complete the paperwork." Then he looked at Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, your suspension is canceled. Your record will show commendation, not discipline." Daniel lowered his eyes, not because he was ashamed, but because relief had weight, and for a moment, he needed both hands to carry it. William continued. Harrington Transit would create a winter emergency policy, giving drivers authority to protect passengers in medical distress. Daniel would lead the training program. His first raise in 8 years would begin that week, and the program would have a name. No one left in the cold. 3 days later, Daniel visited Mercy General to retrieve his jacket. Emily was sitting by the window in a quiet room, sunlight pale against the snow outside. In her arms was a tiny baby wrapped in a white blanket, sleeping with one fist curled beneath her chin. Emily looked stronger, though tired in the way new mothers are tired, with wonder mixed into the exhaustion. "She is healthy," Emily said softly. "The doctor said getting here when we did made all the difference." Daniel stood near the door, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. Emily smiled through tears. "I named her Lily Brooks Parker." The name reached him slowly, then all at once. Daniel covered his mouth, but the tears came anyway, silent and shaking. Emily held the baby out carefully, and he stepped forward as if approaching something sacred. When Lily settled into his arms, warm and impossibly small, the ache he had carried for 12 winters shifted. It didn't disappear. Love that deep never leaves cleanly. But beside the grief, something new made room for itself. A month later, Emily moved into a small apartment arranged through a community fund William created for expectant mothers in crisis. Margaret's video never became the complaint she intended. Another passenger posted the full story, and the city saw exactly what had happened. Some people criticized, some apologized. Some simply asked themselves what they would have done in that seat. As for Daniel, he kept driving through Pittsburgh winters, still waiting when someone ran toward the bus, still keeping spare change in the cup holder, still opening the door when the weather turned cruel. But now, every December, Emily brought Lily to the transit garage with a paper cup of coffee and a tiny holiday card signed in uneven crayon once Lily was old enough to hold one. And every time Daniel saw that little girl smile beneath a knitted pink hat, he remembered the night he broke the rules, lost his jacket, risked his job, and found, in the middle of a snowstorm, one more reason to keep going.